First of all, my name is Eric Davis. I am the Conservation Director with Nebraska's Common Ground program through AmeriCorps. And we do educational events all over the state, sorry, and try to do monthly meetings in each region of the state. Today we have Del and Alice Hemsath. Going to answer your questions for fall and winter gardening tips, as well as any other gardening questions you might have. We have the option to use the Q&A box for questions. You can put your questions there, or you can use the raise hand button, and we'll unmute you and be able to verbally ask your question to them. I'm going to let Del and Alice introduce themselves and talk about their gardening club and whatever else they want to introduce themselves as. And I do want to also mention there is a survey at the end after the webinar is over, and we will be able to have this. This is being recorded, so it will be available for people to watch it later if you know someone who cannot be on it today. So without that, I'm going to turn over to Del and Alice and have them introduce themselves, and we'll look forward to your questions.
Okay, well, thanks, Eric, for asking us to come on and share with everybody about gardening and other kinds of things related to nature. We have been involved in Garden Club for probably over 50 years. I don't want to reveal my age, but it's been a while. We've lived in different parts of the state, northeast Nebraska for a while, southwest Nebraska for several years, and now we're in central Nebraska. So we've been exposed to various kinds of environments and those kinds of things. And each environment is different where we lived, and so different plants adapt to those areas. And so for those of you that have moved, you're well aware of that, but just remember that some plants will work fine in one area and not so well in another area. So it's all different, which makes it a challenge, and that's what makes gardening fun. Just tell you a little bit about our gardening club here in Kearney, just so that you are aware. We've been in here in Kearney for 10 years. Each town we've lived in, we've had a garden club. Either we started one or there was already one there, and we've been a member of that. We're also a member of the state garden club, the Midwest Region Garden Clubs, which is an 8-state affiliation, and then we're automatically into the national garden clubs. So we get exposed to a wide variety of environments because we've been to each of those 8 states, and we've also been to national meetings and so forth in various parts of the United States. So it's an experience well worthwhile, and it makes you feel good about being a Nebraskan, actually, but that's all right. Our garden club was founded in Kearney here in 1967, and we are called Soil Sisters and Misters Garden Club. There's more sisters than there are misters, but that's all right. We're active throughout the year with many activities. We have garden clubs, meetings once a month. We have some kind of program at each meeting. We do tours during the summer when we're able to. This year was kind of different because of the virus situation, but we still had a few outdoor tours. We're involved in gardens at the G.W. Frank Museum. We do the outside landscaping maintenance and do plantings there and those kind of things. And we try to do old style plantings that would match the time that the G.W. Frank Museum was founded and those kinds of things. And sometimes that's easy and sometimes not so easy. There's also a women's club here in Kearney, and we take care of the outside maintenance on that. Primarily that's just Alice and I. Alice is a member and I help with that. We've also done various kinds of other activities with Native American gardens at the Archway Monument, but that has kind of moved out and been phased out over the years, and they don't necessarily do a lot of that there, but we do have a garden club member who still does some raising of Native American crops for that particular area. We're also involved in the county fair here in Buffalo County.
Not this year.
Yeah, not this year, obviously. We also organize occasional tours of area gardens, which are pretty outstanding. And we kind of do that on a regular basis. And perhaps next year we might have one, but again, it depends on this virus situation and what we do with that. But we want to allow people to participate in that because there's a lot of people who do outstanding work in their gardens and landscaping, and others need to see that and get ideas. So that's the way you get ideas on what to do. You look at other people's gardens and take their recommendations and those kinds of things. Other than that, we are involved in a lot of other things, reference the garden club, but I think that's enough just to give you an idea. We do have a website if anybody wants to look at that, and obviously it's titled appropriately, Soil Sisters and Misters Garden Club.com, and all of that is one, I guess you could say, sentence in this case. And so if you have some questions or want to send an email, that would be a good place to do that. I'll just share a little bit about fall gardening and those kind of things, and then Alice maybe can share some things about fall flower care and those kinds of aspects. Alice is the flower person and I'm kind of the garden person. We're in the fall, and I assume most gardens are basically done for the year. There might be some tomato plants out there yet, but this week is probably going to take care of those according to the weather. The main thing in fall gardening is garden cleanup, cleaning up the residue and basically taking it off the garden for the most part. A lot of the residues that you leave on the garden unfortunately have disease organisms in them. And if you let that there on the garden, it will cause disease next year because it resides in the residue and in the soil. So you want to make sure that you leave things on the garden that are not diseased. And probably the safest way is simply to remove everything and start over with other kinds of residues. Then also look at the map that you made for this year. I know everybody made a map of their garden where things were planted. Because if you are somewhat, well, let me say it this way, I can't remember from one year to the next where I planted what in a lot of cases, so I gotta look at my map to make sure. And the reason for that is disease control again. I do not use any pesticides or anything like that or fertilizers in my garden. I use all nature's things that it provides. And so because I rotate crops and avoid areas that I planted this year and don't plant the same thing next year in that same spot, I really don't have much of a problem with diseases. With the exception of this year, as most of you who perhaps have grown tomatoes, there was a tomato virus that kind of showed up this year. And so my tomatoes did not do very well. And it was kind of a waste of time in a lot of aspects trying to grow tomatoes. So every year is different. You can't predict from one year to the next what's going to happen. So again, that was kind of a gotcha from the garden aspect. But I still rotate regardless of that and try to avoid planting in the same spot every year with the same plant. A good mulch to use this year is leaves from the trees, and those will be coming off here pretty soon. I mulch my garden with about 2 to 3 inches of leaves every year, and just let them sit there all winter. I don't necessarily till it in, but you can do that. That provides mulch to feed the organisms in the soil, improves organic matter, saves moisture in the spring, keeps the soil cool so it doesn't get too hot, and for me it works really well. And leaves are usually something that a lot of people get rid of, so you can get some help there with other people with their leaves and pick up their leaves, I guess, for them, or ask them to save the leaves for you. Also here with this week coming with the frost, this is a good time of year to think about tree trimming and pruning off those branches and trimming trees and shrubs for next year. It's also a good time to plant trees. I realize we have April and we're known as a tree planting state in April. But with Arbor Day, really the best time to plant trees is this time of year. The soil is cool, the weather's cool, you don't have much transpiration to all the leaves of the tree. It has all winter to root and to be ready for next year. So if you have a spot you need a tree planted, think about doing that, because probably you can find some trees at reduced prices this time of year at some of your nurseries, because they don't want to take care of those throughout the winter. So this might be a good time to do that. So that's kind of just a general thing with fall things, gardening and trees. I'll have Alice talk a little bit about some of the flowers thing that you should probably be thinking about doing, and maybe some safeguards on that. So Alice, it's all yours.
Thank you, Dell. We are getting ready now to get the flower beds ready for the winter time. Cutting back your hostas. Any perennial starts to decline as the weather gets cooler. An easy way to cut back your hostas or any perennial is using hedge shears. Dell and I work as a team. I gather up all the foliage and he whacks it off. Dell doesn't mention that we compost just about everything that we take out of the flower garden or out of the vegetable garden, and use the compost on Dell's garden. You can cut back just every flowering plant that there is. Hostas, well, we're looking at hostas right now. We still have some iris that we haven't cut back yet. And now's a good time too, if you feel so inclined, to move your plants around, to dig them up and divide them and move them around in your yard. The Soul Sisters and Misters had a plant share last weekend, at Harmon Park, and we had a lot of people show up to share plants and to take plants. And that's another good way to get plants that you perhaps are not familiar with to put into your garden. What else?
Dig any bulbs that need to be dug?
Well, you can transplant bulbs now too. If you're going to plant bulbs, now's an excellent time when it starts getting cooler. Dell and I have waited too long and have had to more or less pry the soil up with a fork just because the ground was frozen. So don't do that. Plant your tulips, your daffodils, any kind of bulb like that, and now is a good time to do it.
So anything else, Alice?
I can't think of anything.
Okay, we'll stop there and just field some questions if there are some, or other things that people want to know more about.
Yeah, we got a question here from Sonia Dittmer. She asked, how do you transplant an iris?
Okay, iris are fairly easy. Iris really aren't buried very deep into the soil at all. The bulbs, you dig up the corms or rhizomes and break them apart basically, and just pull off the new rhizomes that are forming off the side of the major one, and just plant that in this area that you want new iris. You can plant the rhizomes with them facing inward for all your little plants, so that the iris will grow and send out more plants from that point.
Yeah, maybe 6 inches apart.
Yeah. So you kind of have a little circle of new iris bulbs planted where you want them.
You don't plant them very deep.
No, you just want to cover up the roots that are there and make sure it's well watered and perhaps mulched a little bit. But they're pretty hardy, and this is an excellent time to do that. And we lost you, Eric.
No, I had myself muted. We have another question here from Pat. Is it a good time to trim peonies?
Trim what?
Peonies.
peonies. Well, you cut your peonies back right now. Just cut them off at the ground. And most of the peonies, if it was like at the Frank Museum, they had mildew really bad. And mildew is caused by humidity. And in Nebraska and Kearney, there's not much you can do about the humidity. You can use fungicide on peonies, but we don't worry about it. You can move peonies now, but you can also move peonies in the spring and just divide them.
Yeah, you can divide peonies, so if you want more plantings, you can just dig up a peony area and just split the mass of roots and so forth and plant them where you want. It does take a while for them to get established and to bloom. It's not as easy as some other plants.
It's not like iris.
No, not like iris, but now's a good time to do that. You don't really need to have that foliage there for very long because it's basically done. It's got everything reserved for the winter, so it's time to take it off.
Okay, we have a question from Barbara here. Is it too late to plant lettuce from seed into planter boxes?
Actually, no. Lettuce is a fall crop, along with beets and spinach and those kinds of things. And you can have that it'll stand cold weather. So yeah, if you want fresh lettuce, now's a good time to do that. You might want to start perhaps the seeds inside in your box because it's a little bit warmer. And then you can set it outside as the seeds start to sprout and so forth, so the plants get accustomed to the cool weather and cool nights. But yeah, that's no problem. In fact, you can even plant the lettuce, well, I guess you can call your box a planter box, which is fine, but you can plant the seeds in a pot and do the same thing throughout the whole winter, or yeah, throughout the whole winter inside.
The tunnels.
And if you want to get really into it, you can have the tunnels that are plastic covered and so forth to grow your lettuce in. But again, that takes extra work, extra time, and extra money. So it depends how much effort you want to put into that. But yes, any of those cool season crops will work now.
I have a question from Janice. She says, a lot of the leaves had rust from a fungus this year. I don't know what type of leaves she's asking about. And she's asking if this is okay to put out in the garden, like in mulch, I'm assuming?
Yeah, if we're talking about leaves off of trees, there's really no connection between tree fungus or tree type problems and garden plant type problems. Those leaves will still work in the garden. There's no problem there. The problem with one disease carrying over from one year to the next is similar plants being put back in the same area and those kinds of things. But tree leaves should not be a problem at all in the garden area.
I got a question from Stacy here. She says, with the weather changing, do I need to bring my beets inside, or will they be fine until ready to harvest maybe in 2 or 3 more weeks?
Oh, they should be all right for 2 or 3 more weeks, unless it gets really, really cold, but it's not supposed to get that frosty. So I think they'll be fine, probably for another month or so.
You can always cover them up if you're worried.
Does anyone else have any more questions? Give you time to write them down or raise your hand if you want. Hello, Jackie. Jackie, are you there?
Eric, it looks like her audio hasn't connected yet, so I don't know if you want to skip to Barbara's question for now, and then we can come back to Jackie if she gets that connected.
Okay, we'll go with Barbara's question here. She says, how do you control It's Bindweed. No,
Or bindweed?
Yes.
Pull, pull, pull,
Bind-
pull, pull.
I assume that's bindweed. Once you have bindweed, you basically have it forever, unfortunately. You can dig deep down into the soil with a spade and try to get the base roots that are way down, but sometimes those roots will go down to 2 feet and they spread out horizontally and send up new plants, those kind of things. So it's one of those weeds you just simply have to put up with. Just keep it trim it back. You can try some herbicides if you like. Some people don't like that, but you can try that. A Roundup, of course, is used in a lot of perennial weeds like that. Personally, there are some issues with Roundup. We don't know all the effects of that, I don't think anyway yet. And so you can use standard other herbicides like 2,4-D things, but bindweed is a very, very difficult one, and no one has come up with a solution yet that you put on and it's taken care of forever, because it just simply has so much root reserves in it that it keeps coming back. So you can approach that in different ways too. If you have an area that you can cover with clear plastic, and just cover that area with clear plastic for a whole year or more, the heat from the sun will basically burn those roots in the vegetation and basically starve the bindweed. But again, you'll never get it all. All you do is kind of cut back on the number of plants and the ferocity of the plant. And it becomes a very frustrating situation. I agree. I have bindweed in my garden and it's all over, and I just kind of put up with it. And,
Well, yeah, but you do hoe it off.
Yeah, I try to keep it somewhat under control, but again, it's very, very difficult.
So you have to be really persistent.
Yeah.
All right, and we have one from Janice here. It's when is the best time to prune back an oak leaf hydrangea?
It's just a regular hydrangea.
Mhm.
I'll let you go.
Generally, you prune back a shrub that blooms like a hydrangea after it blooms. So hydrangeas usually bloom sometime now, summer. It depends on where you're at. But after it blooms or after it frosts, then you can cut back hydrangeas.
About a foot off the ground.
Well, it depends on how much you want to cut it off.
Okay.
Yeah. How short you want it to be. I personally never would prune my hydrangeas. We just deadhead the flowers. We like the flowers. We have the hydrangeas we just let the flowers stay over winter, and then we cut them back and the flowers off in the spring when the new foliage starts to come. But that's what we do with hydrangeas.
Yeah, they're pretty lenient, not very particular on when they're pruned, so it's entirely up to you when you want to do that. There's no particular time necessarily to do that, but prune it before it starts new growth in the spring for sure.
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and go to Jackie's question since she was trying to ask the question with voice. And so it's, can you grow lettuce and spinach inside during winter, or do you need a grow light for them?
You'll need some kind of a grow light for that, just simply because they do require enough light. So putting it by a window and those kind of things just simply is not going to probably be enough light. So some kind of additional light would work. Some kind of fluorescent light of some type, or a grow light that has special wavelengths to kind of stimulate that growth. That would be the best inside like that.
All right. Sonia asked about her rhubarb that she's had for 2 years. She said it has not done very well the last 2 years. Where should one plant rhubarb? And she doesn't understand why it didn't grow the last 2 years.
Well, join the club. My rhubarb didn't do anything this year. In fact, I think I'm just basically losing it, and I really don't know why. It's best to plant rhubarb in full sun, and once you plant the starter plant, you should let it go for at least 2 years and do not harvest, and let it establish a good underground system before you start harvesting that next year. And my rhubarb, like I mentioned, didn't do anything this year. I don't know what happened or why. I'm kind of disappointed because I did plant some new rhubarb and it was fine last year, and this year it just didn't do anything. So I don't really know what to say about that, but full sunlight, once you get it planted and established for 2 years, then you can start to harvest and enjoy the taste of rhubarb. That's one of my favorite pies, rhubarb pie.
And Sonia actually had another question. Is there anything that can help a mulberry tree produce fruit? Had a lot last year and not much this year. Is there a reason why there was not a lot this year for it?
That's kind of common with any fruit trees or any tree that bears a berry. It might produce a lot one year, and the next year it will not produce very much, if any at all. That happens on your fruit trees like apples or peaches, or any of your fruit trees like that. The fruit tree, that puts a lot of stress on the tree when it bears fruit, and so it has to take some time to recover, and a lot of times it does that the following year. The same happened with the mulberry tree that I harvest. That gave me just a few mulberries last year. Not very many at all, and this year it was just loaded like crazy. I've never seen so many. So I'm expecting no mulberries next year. So we'll kind of have to see what that happens, but that's not unusual. No particular reason for that, except maybe, you know, just the weather conditions perhaps had something to do with that. It's really hard to tell from one year to the next why a fruit tree did not produce. We also have access to a peach tree, and we had to wait 3 years after it first produced to get another crop of peaches, and this year we were just overwhelmed with peaches. So I don't know if we'll get any next year. I kind of doubt it. So that's Nebraska. Nebraska is not a good place for fruit trees, but we do have some that do quite well here. But again, it takes special care and special varieties. And this year, yeah, we didn't get any apples this year. But I think it had something to do with the late frost that we had, or early frost, the cool temperatures, the up and down temperatures, those kind of things. Fruit trees don't like that. So you're not in the boat alone. There are a lot of other things that happen like that. So nothing you can do about it. Just allow nature to take its course.
All right, we got a fun question here actually. What is your favorite flower to grow?
Oh, my all-time favorite flower to grow are roses. I'm addicted to roses. And we have, since we live in a condominium, we have 2 rose bushes. So that's not very many. So I plant them. Well, Frank Museum has a lot of roses, and I just love them. If you were talking about a perennial, oh, what's my favorite perennial? I would say it's a toss-up between a peony and an iris. I love both of those. But we grow a lot of, because where we live, that's why we're so big on working at the Frank Museum, because there's a lot of cool plants at the Frank Museum.
And roses just are unique in pruning. Normally you just cut off the spent blossoms and the buds, and it will stimulate the plant to produce more if it's a common rose or whatever.
We don't do hybrid teas.
Yeah, and you don't cut roses all the way back. You just kind of keep them in check as far as growth. Again, there are lots and lots of different kind of roses to grow, but most of them do fairly well here in Nebraska. So that is a good plant to grow. in border areas. Adds a lot of color, and most of them bloom all year long if you prune them correctly and they like where they're at. So.
All right, Jackie had another question here. How do you get rid of lily of the valley?
Dell does not like lily of the valley.
It's a lot easier than bindweed, let me tell you. Basically, you got to dig out the roots. Again, you can use herbicides, but again, I don't really like that, even though I have used herbicides. Usually the roots are down like about 6 inches below the soil surface, and you start digging and the roots again will spread out and lead you to another plant and those kind of things. That would be my #1 suggestion, is just physically digging them out. But you can use, again, a systemic herbicide if you apply it correctly and apply it on a timely basis, which is always a problem. The place has to be wet so the plant's actively growing, and you don't want to hurt your other plants that might be in the same area. So again, that's why I kind of spend a lot of time at the G.W. Frank Museum digging those out, because once they're there, you basically have them all the time. But again, once you get ahead of them, you can kind of manage that and keep them from taking over. But yeah, that's another, I guess, what you can call an invasive plant. Some people love them and they plant them so they have them there, and if in the right spot, they're fine. They're a good ground cover and they give you the flowers and those kind of things. But if you have other things planted in the same area, it tends to take over. So again, it's knowing what the flower is like when you are planting new plants, knowing what it does, and becoming familiar with it before you stick it in the ground and then you realize you made a mistake. So yeah, lily of the valley is one of those things that we're trying to monitor and take care of at the museum, but it's a yearly project right now.
All right. Barbara had an interesting question here. She says her gooseberry has some kind of yucky stuff on some of the wood. She thinks it might be a fungus. She's wondering, what can I treat it with that is safe for fruit that we actually eat? So she eats up this fruit. And what time of year, when do you treat it?
Okay, that's a good question for Backyard Farmer. They are still on the air, and you can send in some photos of your problem to the Backyard Farmer and let the experts take care of that one, because I'm not familiar with gooseberry diseases or anything like that. So I would not be the one to really answer that, even though I like gooseberries. I used to pick wild gooseberries when I was growing up out in the country. But I'm glad you have them, because that's kind of an unusual thing that you don't find too much. But Backyard Farmer would be the one to ask on that.
And Jackie asks, do you have to wait for the first hard frost to cut peonies back, or no?
No, you can cut them back as they slowly decline during this time of year. Like we've cut back all the peonies at the Frank Museum a little over a week ago, because the plant is already getting ready for winter, so it's done doing what it needs to do to store up food in the root. So yeah, you can cut them back now.
Oh, I got a question. All right. Stacy asked, favorite deer or squirrel resistant plants and vegetables, or even trees. They live on the edge of Fontenelle Forest, and wildlife eat everything that she plants, apparently. Oh, I feel sorry for her. So squirrel and deer resistant plants and vegetables or trees.
Squirrel resistant plants? Again, that's a good question for Backyard Farmer. Personally, I don't know of anything that's resistant to squirrels liking to chew on and those kind of things. I mean, squirrels can get in attics and cause you problems there if you live in the right spot. So they're not choosy on where they go or what they do. So yeah, backyard farmer would be the one to ask on that. They usually have some wildlife specialists on there for that. And living at the edge of the Fontenelle Forest, you're going to have squirrel problems, obviously. So I don't know of anything special that can be done in reference to that at all.
You're going to have to screen everything.
Yeah, you're going to have to just physically screen something out if you have an area you don't want them to get in. And sometimes that's very hard. I'm sure you've perhaps watched videos on how squirrels are very intelligent and getting into bird feeders, regardless of what you do to try to keep them out. They're very ingenious and innovative in how they get into where you don't want them. So again, that's a very, very difficult situation, and I have no solutions for that at all for you.
Dog.
Yeah, some other animal to keep them out, but again, that's a very difficult situation.
All right. Guy here. How do you keep leaves used to protect perennials from blowing away?
On my garden, I use a fence just to lay on top of the leaves after I have them on the garden. And that fence can be any type of fence. It can be a wire fence that's got the 6-inch squares in it. I forget what you call that, but that will work. Or if you have some panels of some type, to lay on top of the leaves, just something to lay on top to keep them from blowing away. You can actually use branches, perhaps. Lay dead branches on top that you've perhaps trimmed off trees. But yeah, you do have to have something laying there to protect the leaves from blowing away and to still allow snow to filtrate, water to filtrate, those kind of things. So
Chicken wire.
yeah, chicken wire, any of your wires that you find at some of your nurseries and so forth to protect your trees, keep the animals away from the stems or the trunk, you can use on your garden as well. But snow fence, if you have an access to a snow fence, that would work. Just something that will hold the leaves down. So there's nothing specific that will work better than anything else. Just something on top.
All right. Heather asked a question about sunflowers, so I'm pretty interested in this. So, like sunflowers, how can I keep bugs from eating my sunflowers? So she has a bug problem.
Sunflowers,
I assume these are sunflowers growing for seeds. And the sunflowers, are the insects eating the seeds or the plant itself?
She didn't specify that, so I'm not sure.
Boy, that's kind of out of my area. I mean, I grow seed sunflowers or tame sunflowers, as they might be called. I never had an insect problem with those, but if she does, I'm sure there are some insecticides or some type of pesticides that can be used for that. Again, she might have to check at a nursery or again, refer you to backyard farming for that type of thing, because it's kind of out of my area and I'm not familiar with that.
Okay, we got a long question here. She got a little backstory about it. It's from Barbara. She says, every year the petunias in my hanging basket get some kind of flying insect that eats the flowers and the leaves. This year it seems like the same flying pest ate my gardenia plant that was in a pot on the opposite side of her house. She hates to spray them with something that kills bees, so she's worried about insecticides. What would you suggest? I wonder what that could be.
We're thinking.
Yeah.
Again, that's very difficult to answer. There are some powders that could be put on the leaves to deter or perhaps control the insects if they're eating the leaves. That would not bother the bees at all or anything else, butterflies or whatever, because it's on the foliage. If it's a foliage feeding insect, and if it's the adult, those are a lot of times more difficult to control than if it's the larva. If it's a larva, you can use a natural product like BT, Bacillus thuringiensis or something like that, which is not really a herbicide or a pesticide. It's a natural control disease-wise.
You mean insect-wise?
Insect-wise, yeah. But other than that, I really don't have a solid and surefire answer
What
for
about
that.
sticky traps?
Or sticky traps might work. Hang that in your plant
Or
to
a
see
stick?
what kind of a bug is eating that. The key is to find out what kind of an insect is feeding first, because that will allow you to figure out some control for it. If it's a beetle of some type, they move from one plant to another, so that could be a problem. If it's the larva stage of some insect, again, they're treated differently. So you have to identify the problem first before you can come up with a solution. And of course, there's lots of things that feed on plants. So again, it has to be a very unique situation to figure out and say what exactly is happening without seeing or finding the insect. So
That's why like a yellow sticky trap that you can put on a stick. The insects are, all insects like the color yellow. So that's why sticky traps are yellow. And then the insect is there, it's stuck to the pad, and you can then identify the insect.
and you can get those sticky pads. Any garden center would have those.
All right. Is there any other questions? We'll give them time to type. Sonia has another question. What are some long-lasting blooming flowers? So,
Long-lasting, iris.
Long-lasting meaning in a year or for over several years. There's a difference, I think. I interpret that question as long-lasting, meaning it lasts from one year to the next. But she may be asking what flowers, when they bloom in the spring, how long will they last throughout the year, and what's the best plan? So maybe maybe we answer it in both ways. Long-lasting flowers, of course, are any of your perennials.
Yeah. And there is really no perennial that starts in the spring and goes till fall.
Right. Some of your annuals are spring blooming, or your perennials are spring blooming, or summer blooming, or fall. So I don't know of any plant that will bloom and keep the blossom there all year long. They might bloom multiple times, like roses. They'll bloom from spring to fall, but new flowers have to come on. You don't have the same one every month or every, this doesn't last all year. So
there's a lot of shrubs that bloom all summer long.
Yeah, a lot of shrubs bloom all summer long. One bush that is really not suited for Nebraska, but I know several people that have it, and that's the butterfly bush. Once it gets going, which is kind of late in the spring, but it'll bloom all year long, send out new flowers and so forth, and you really can't tell that it's not blooming or anything like that from one week to another. It's always got blossoms on it, just that it's new blossoms. So if you're terming the long lasting as something that lasts all summer, that wouldn't really last but the flower itself doesn't last all summer. It just sends out new ones all the time.
Well, daylilies last a long time.
Yeah, daylilies last a long time.
Yeah, she did specify that she would like both answers, and I think you're doing that. So,
Okay.
and is that she's like also said ones that keep having flowers, so continuously having flowers throughout the summer would be a shrub, another shrub or a bush or flower that has that.
There are a lot of shrubs that are small shrubs, like potentilla, which is yellow flowers all summer long. Some spireas also flower all summer long. Like I say, hydrangeas will come on later in the summer, but then they last a long time. Those potentilla and spireas are probably two that are planted most often for all summer flowering.
How about that rose on the west?
Well, and then roses.
The rose on the west side of the Frank house there, that one that's purple colored and stuff.
Well, yeah, there's roses. So the purple one.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's a rose of Sharon.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Rose of Sharon.
That's a very tall shrub.
Yeah.
That comes on and it blooms quite a long time, but it's a tall shrub.
Yeah. Very tall.
Very tall. But it's been very pretty.
Yeah.
It's been really gorgeous.
So I hope that helps a little bit.
Heather has a question about zinnias. Will zinnias come back in the spring if I throw the dead flowers on the ground, or do I have to bury them?
Zinnias aren't known to be self-sowing. There are some that's like marigolds will self-sow. I'm not really, I wouldn't want to say that yes, zinnias will self-sow. If you've had them that self-sow then you're very fortunate. Most of the time you have to plant zinnias every year.
From seed or plant?
From seed.
Yeah.
Well, you can.
I think you can save your seed from this year
Yeah.
till next,
And then
but self-sowing probably is not going to work.
I don't think they overwinter well.
Yeah.
And I don't even think burying them would help.
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Let's see who asked this question right now. All right. Barbara asked a question about her grapevine. The Japanese beetles attacked her grapevine this year. Should I get rid of all my elderberry since she thinks the elderberry is attracting the beetles?
Well, the Japanese beetle is a new insect for everybody in Nebraska, but it's slowly spreading throughout the state. As I understand it, this year has been a unique year for the Japanese beetle. It's very high in population. And they're thinking that next year there will be less because there's always an up and down in population of the Japanese beetle. The best control for that is actually picking the beetles off as you find them. And putting them in hot soapy water or soapy water to get rid of them. Again, there are some insecticides that can be used, but it's a lot of times not very effective. So with the Japanese beetle, that is probably going to become a more serious problem as time goes on. We'll just have to wait and see. But yeah, control is very difficult, and all plants are susceptible to that particular insect. Feeds on your roses and your grapevines. About anything that's green, it'll feed on. Fortunately, it kind of dies over the winter, and it has to kind of migrate in the area. So maybe next year we won't have a serious problem like there was this year, but that's a very difficult insect to control.
And she does ask a follow-up question. Is she right that elderberries attract them?
I am not aware if they are or not. Again, that might be a backyard farmer question or a Google question on the internet about the Japanese beetle. I don't know that
I
a
don't
particular plant attracts the Japanese beetle. I think it likes anything that's green.
And is elderberry a desirable or nuisance plant?
Elderberries?
Well, elderberries are a kind of a native plant that usually grows in clumps, I guess you can call that, normally found along stream beds or wet areas. And obviously it's a berry that it produces, and the elderberries themselves can be used to make jams and jellies. You can actually make a wine out of it if you're a winemaker. You can actually make pies out of it. It's kind of a early fall seed head that the berries come on. And again, it's kind of variable in one year to the next if the elderberries will produce. But if you have a place for it, they do kind of spread. So again, it's one of those plants you plant and then, my gosh, you got them all over. But they spread by underground rhizomes or whatever and roots that way. So you can somewhat control them, but you want them in the area where you're not wanting something else necessarily. So they're not an obnoxious plant or anything like that. They get about 6 foot tall, maybe at the most, and 7 foot tall. And they have a nice blossoms or flowers that you see, white flowers. But again, they're basically there to produce berries for the homeowner, I guess you could.
We like elderberries.
Yeah.
Okay, we got one more question. That's going to be the last question because we're right about the hour mark. We don't like to go too far over an hour. So this question is about tulips. Says, after planting tulip bulbs, how far into the season do you need to water them this time of the year? So I'm assuming they just recently planted them. So how soon or do you need to water the tulip bulbs?
Well, I'll kind of put in my 3 cents worth, and Alice can add to that. Hopefully the soil is wet or somewhat wet where you're planting the bulbs, and once you get the bulbs in and cover them up, I would say there's probably not any excess watering that needs to be done because it is just going to send out some roots this fall in the ground. The ground's going to stay warm for a while. And then next spring it'll start to grow and so forth. And I don't know that tulips really need any extra water as such.
Unless it's extremely dry.
Yeah, unless the soil is sandy or something like that and it dries out really fast, or we don't get any rain at all. No snow cover, those kinds of things. But tulips are pretty hardy because it is a bulb and it's below ground enough that there should be enough moisture there for it to do fine. But I don't, perhaps you can water them too much and get some bulb rot too. I don't really know that particular thing about
Well, yeah, they'll rot.
yeah, about tulip bulbs, but it should not need any extra watering this fall unless the soil is really, really dry where she's planting them. You got anything to say?
No?
Oh, okay.
I'm
So that's our answer.
All right. Thank you guys for all your great questions, and hopefully you'll learn something. Because I did. Sonia says thank you. And this will be available later on our YouTube channel, Conservation Nebraska. If you have a friend who wants to learn a little bit, so please share that with everyone. You can like our Conservation Nebraska on Facebook to get all our information on upcoming events. And there's a survey at the end after this. So thank you all for attending. Thank you, Del and Alice, for answering all these questions that we've never been able to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.